Welcome to Digital Story Corner, where every story stirs your soul. Today we have a very special, emotional story for you. Sit back, relax, and let's begin. The air in Ethelgard tasted of ozone and sterile rain. High above the smog-choked ruins of the lowlands, the floating city hummed with a vibration that rattled the teeth of anyone not born to its silver spires. Kalen leaned against a polished chrome pillar, his silk cloak fluttering in the artificial breeze. He watched the security drones drift by like bloated metallic jellyfish, their blue scanners sweeping the promenade. "Stop fidgeting, Prince. You look like a nervous bird," Sloane said. Sloane stood in the shadow of a vending kiosk, her leather jacket scuffed and smelling of old grease and gunpowder. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the vault entrance of the Ministry of Records. "I am not fidgeting," Kalen replied, his voice tight. "I am calculating the rotation of the centuries." "You're shaking. Your hands are literally vibrating," Sloane said. She finally looked at him, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "First time stealing from your own family's legacy?" "It was stolen from me first," Kalen said. "The biochip contains the only remaining record of the lineage seal. Without it, I am nothing but a ghost in a fancy coat." "You're a ghost with a very expensive tailor," Sloane said. "Now shut up. The window is opening." She stepped out from the shadows, her movements fluid and predatory. She tapped a device on her wrist, and for a split second, the blue light of the drones flickered and died. "Move," she commanded. They sprinted across the plaza, boots slapping against the iridescent tiles. Kalen struggled to keep pace, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They reached the vault door, a massive slab of obsidian glass that pulsed with a faint amber light. "This is the part where you do the magic," Sloane said. Kalen stepped forward, his fingers trembling as he pressed his palm against the glass. The scanner chirped, analyzing the genetic markers in his blood. The amber light turned green. "Still recognizes the royal blood," Kalen whispered, "even after they stripped my titles." "Don't get sentimental. Get the chip," Sloane said. Inside, the vault was a cathedral of data. Thousands of floating crystals drifted in a zero-gravity field, each one containing a lifetime of secrets. In the center, encased in a vacuum sphere, sat the biochip. "It's smaller than I imagined," Kalen said. "Everything is smaller when you're actually looking at it," Sloane said. "Hurry up! The reboot on those drones is going to be fast." Kalen reached into the sphere, his fingers brushing the cold surface of the chip. As he pulled it free, a siren wailed, a piercing shriek that tore through the silence of the room. Red lights flashed, painting the walls in the color of fresh blood. "Change of plans," Sloane said, drawing a heavy kinetic pistol. "We run now." The exit was blocked by 4 armored guards, their visors reflecting the flashing red lights. Sloane didn't hesitate. She fired 3 shots in rapid succession, the booms echoing like thunder. One guard collapsed, his chest cavity caved in by the force of the slugs. The others dove for cover. "Go! Go!" Sloane yelled. They bolted through the corridor, the sounds of heavy boots chasing them. Kalen felt a searing heat graze his shoulder, a bullet ripping through the silk of his cloak. He stumbled, the chip clutched tight in his fist. "Get up!" Sloane screamed. She grabbed the collar of his coat and hauled him upward with a strength that surprised him. She shoved him through a maintenance hatch just as a volley of fire peppered the wall behind them. They tumbled into a dark, damp chute, sliding for what felt like miles before slamming into a pile of discarded synthetic waste. The air here was thick with the smell of sulfur and rotting plastic. They were in the underbelly of Ethelgard, the place where the city's filth gathered. "You okay, Your Highness?" Sloane asked. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving under the leather. "I believe I am bleeding," Kalen said, glancing at his shoulder. "It's a scratch. Stop whining," Sloane said. She stood up and offered him a hand. As he took it, the tension that had been simmering between them for weeks suddenly spiked. They were drenched in sweat and grime, their hearts hammering in unison. The adrenaline of the heist had stripped away the layers of pretense. Kalen didn't let go of her hand. He pulled her closer, his eyes searching hers. "You saved my life," Kalen whispered. "I'm getting paid to keep you alive," Sloane said, though her voice lacked its usual bite. Is that all I am? A paycheck? Sloane looked at him, her gaze dropping to his lips. You're an annoying, arrogant brat. But you have a certain appeal. She closed the gap, her mouth crashing against his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. Kalen groaned, his tongue pushing past her lips to taste the salt and metal of her. He gripped her waist, pulling her flush against him. Sloane's hands flew to his hair, tugging sharply, forcing his head back to gain a better angle. Their saliva exchanged in a wet, sloppy slide, the sound of their kissing echoing in the narrow concrete tunnel. Get me out of these clothes, Sloane gasped, breaking the kiss for a second. Kalen didn't need to be told twice. He tore at the buttons of her leather jacket, shoving the garment off her shoulders. Underneath, she wore a thin, sweat-soaked tank top that clung to the curves of her breasts. He reached inside, his palms cupping the warm weight of her tits. He squeezed hard, feeling her nipples harden into tight pebbles beneath the fabric. Sloane let out a low, guttural moan. She reached for his trousers, her fingers fumbling with the buckle before ripping them open. She reached inside his underwear, her hand wrapping around his cock. He was already rock hard, a thick vein pulsing along the shaft. God, you're huge, she whispered, her voice husky. She slid her hand up and down, the friction of her palm against his glands creating a wet, sliding sound. Kalen arched his back, a shudder running through his entire frame. He pushed her back against the damp wall, his hands sliding down to her hips. He ripped her pants down, exposing her bare skin to the chill of the tunnel. Sloane was already dripping. Her pussy was a glistening slit of pink flesh, soaked with pre-cum that smelled of musk and heat. Kalen knelt before her, his breath hot against her inner thigh. He parted her lips with his fingers, revealing the swollen, dark red clit pulsing with every heartbeat. Please, she whimpered. Kalen flicked his tongue across her clit, a sharp, wet stroke that made her legs shake. He began to lap at her, his tongue diving deep into her folds, sucking the juices from her pussy with a loud, squelching sound. He used his thumb to grind against her clit while his tongue worked the entrance, tasting the salty, metallic tang of her arousal. Sloane screamed, her fingers digging into his shoulders, her nails drawing blood. She bucked against him, her hips snapping forward as she hit her first climax. Her pussy clamped down on his tongue, waves of pleasure racking her body. Kalen didn't stop. He stood up, his cock leaking pre-cum that smeared across his stomach. He gripped her thighs and lifted her, wrapping her legs around his waist. He positioned the head of his cock against her soaking wet opening. Look at me, he commanded. Sloane opened her eyes, her pupils blown wide. Kalen thrust forward, burying himself deep inside her in one violent motion. The sound was a loud, wet thud, a schlick, as his girth forced its way through her tight walls. Oh, fuck, Sloane gasped, her head snapping back against the concrete. You're stretching me. Kalen didn't slow down. He began to pump into her, his hips slamming against hers with rhythmic brutality. The sound of their bodies colliding was a wet, slapping noise, the sound of skin hitting skin over and over. Each thrust pushed air out of her pussy, creating a squelching, popping sound that filled the tunnel. He felt her internal muscles gripping him, squeezing his shaft with an intensity that nearly drove him over the edge. He reached up, grabbing one of her breasts and twisting the nipple between his fingers. Sloane let out a loud, vulgar cry, her voice echoing. Harder! Give it to me harder, you royal prick, she yelled. Kalen obeyed. He accelerated the pace, his thrusts becoming shorter and more frantic. He could feel the friction building, the heat of their combined sweat making them slide against each other. His balls slapped loudly against her perineum with every plunge, the sound wet and visceral. As he pushed deeper, he felt his cock hit her cervix, a blunt impact that made Sloane gasp and arch her back. He groaned, the sensation of her tight, wet heat wrapping around him, pushing him toward the brink. He felt the buildup in his loins, a pressure that demanded release. I'm going to come, he groaned, his voice a guttural rasp. Do it! Fill me up! Sloane screamed. Kalen let out a loud, animalistic roar as he slammed himself into her one last time, holding her tight against the wall. He erupted inside her, a hot, thick torrent of cum shooting deep into her womb. He felt the pulses of his orgasm racking his body, wave after wave of seed pumping into her. Sloane tightened around him, her own second orgasm hitting her, her pussy walls pulsing in rhythmic contractions that sucked every last drop from his cock. They stayed like that for a long time, chests heaving, their skin glued together by sweat and fluids. The smell of sex and sulfur hung heavy in the air. Eventually, Kaylin slid out of her with a wet, popping sound. A mixture of cum and pussy juice leaked from her opening, dripping down her thigh and onto the dirty floor. Sloane slid down the wall, sitting on the concrete with her legs sprawled open. She looked up at him, a genuine smile on her face for the first time. "Not bad for a ghost," she said. Kaylin looked down at her, his breathing finally slowing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the biochip, the amber light still faintly pulsing. "We still have to get this to the contact," Kaylin said. Yeah, Sloane said, leaning back and closing her eyes. "Give me 5 minutes. My legs are like jelly." Kaylin sat down beside her, their shoulders touching. He looked up at the ceiling of the tunnel, imagining the silver spires of Ethelgard far above them. He had the chip, but as he looked at the mercenary beside him, he realized the legacy he had been chasing felt suddenly insignificant. "Sloane?" he asked. "When this is over, where do you go?" Sloane opened one eye and looked at him. "Wherever the credits are, Prince." "Why? Thinking of hiring a permanent bodyguard?" Kaylin smiled, a real, unburdened smile. "I think I might." "Don't get mushy on me now," Sloane said, though she leaned her head on his shoulder. "It ruins the aesthetic." They sat in the silence of the Undercity, two broken pieces of a fragmented world, waiting for the adrenaline to fade so they could face the war waiting for them above. The biochip sat between them, a small piece of plastic and gold that held the power to rebuild a kingdom, but in the dim light of the tunnels, it looked like nothing more than a piece of trash. "You know," Sloane said, her voice drifting, "your technique is actually decent, for someone who probably learned everything from a textbook." "I'll have you know I am a very quick study," Kaylin replied. "Clearly," she whispered, reaching over to squeeze his hand. They stood up together, cleaning themselves as best they could with the remnants of Kaylin's torn cloak. They adjusted their clothes, the leather and silk now stained and ruined, but neither of them cared. They began the long climb back toward the surface, their footsteps echoing in the dark. As they reached the final ladder leading back to the promenade, Sloane stopped and looked at him. "One rule," she said. "What's that?" "If we survive this, you're paying for the drinks." Kaylin laughed, a sound that felt foreign in his own throat. "Deal." They climbed out into the sterile air of Ethelgard, the blue lights of the drones once again sweeping the horizon. They didn't look like royalty or mercenaries anymore. They looked like survivors. And as they vanished into the crowd, the floating city continued to hum, oblivious to the two ghosts who had just stolen back a piece of the sun. If this story moved you, subscribe to Digital Story Corner and hit the bell. A brand new story drops every single day.